Bonsuelo Mathletes. This one's going to be a while. This has got several videos to it. We're going to try and take it one step at a time. But where are we all headed with this in section 2.7? Okay, so like at the very beginning, you're just not going to get the sense of this is what we're trying to do. But I want to make sure you know what it is we're trying to do. Not just how to do it, but what is it? This is what we're going to do. We're going to take a graph, a simple graph, and do stuff to it. Now, what the heck does that mean? Okay, I'm going to scribble something here. Don't you write it. Just listen, and then we'll see what happens. Let's take this graph. Okay, you should already know that's an absolute value graph. It's a V shape. Okay? I'm going to take that graph, and everything I'm going to draw on it's going to be kind of dashed, because that's actually, you know what? I think I'll dash the original. Okay? But let's say we have the basic absolute value graph, which is a V. Okay, this is what I'm going to do to it. I'm going to take it and I'm going to shift it to the right. Now, I'm not changing anything about the way it looks. I'm just shifting it to the right. That's one thing I'm going to do. Then what am I going to do? I'm going to shift it to the left. The graph's going to look the exact same. It's still a V, only it's shifted to the left. Okay, then what am I going to do? I'm going to shift it up. Still the exact same graph, it's just moved up. Then what am I going to do? Yeah, you guessed it, I'm going to move it down. Still the exact same graph, I've just shifted it up, down, left, or right, okay? Then what am I going to do? I'm going to shift it, let's say to the right and up. Okay, that's what a shift is. The graph looks the exact same, only it's moved to a different location, right? That's ultimately where we're headed. Just listen for now. Don't write any of this down, just listen. Because I want to make sure you know where we're headed, what we're trying to do. Okay, well, what am I going to do then? All right, I'm going to grab the ends where the arrows are here. Sorry. I'm going to grab the ends where the arrows are here, and keeping that bottom point right here, like where what's called the vertex of the graph is, I'm going to grab these arrows and I'm going to pull them up. So they're like right there and right there. But if the vertex, if the bottom of the V is staying the same, what's it going to look like? It's going to be stretched. So notice what I've done. From the original dashed graph, I've stretched up the video, okay? I've stretched up the graph. So, what else could I do? Well, aside from stretching it, I could also smash it down. So I'm going to put my hand on top of it and push down on it, okay? Well, what happens when I push down on it is the graph gets kind of smashed. Now, it's still a V. It's not much of a V. I didn't draw it very well. But it's still a V, but it's kind of a smashed V. Just like the other V was still a V, but it was stretched up. Okay? Well, what else can I do? I can flip it upside down. Okay? These are all graphing techniques. So what are these graphing techniques? I'm going to shift it, up, down, left, or right. I'm going to stretch it out or compress it. In other words, yank it up or smash it down. Or I'm going to flip it over. That's a reflection. So number one, I'm going to shift it, Number two, not necessarily in this order, but number two, the other thing we're going to do is stretch or compress it. And number three, we're going to flip it upside down. Okay, well, on each of these, you need to have something to start with in order to stretch, compress, flip. In other words, you have to stretch something. You have to compress something. You have to shift something. Okay? And one of two things is going to happen. Either I'm going to hand you a graph and say, here, stretch this, compress it, shift it, reflect it. Or I'm going to give you an equation and say, whatever this equation would look like, then stretch it, then compress it, then shift it, et cetera, et cetera. So basically, you have to either be given a graph or you have to have a graph shape memorized, a basic graph shape memorized. And these are the four basic graph shapes you're going to memorize. Now, I've already given you three of these before, the quadratic, the x squared, the cubic, which I said is not that important, but you do need to know it. Okay, an absolute value, okay? The new one's going to be a radical. Okay, a square root. We're only going to deal with a square root, okay? So you should have these memorized. You should be able to draw them very, very quickly. So I'm just going to go through them again. By the way, notice the one I've left off here is linear. All these graphing techniques, will they work for a linear equation? Yes, but they're a bad way to do a linear equation. All right? You should do a linear equation like we did back at the beginning of this chapter. All right? You can, and Alex may ask you to, but for me, I will never ask you to use any of these graphing techniques on a linear equation. For a linear equation, just stick, a point and a slope, basically. All right? So let's take a look at each of these fairly quickly. Again, in our head for right now, we would make actually three of these. You should already have memorized the x squared, the x cubed, and the absolute value of x. But if you didn't, if I just gave these to you and never shown them to you before, what you would do is you'd make an XY table. So again, let's make the XY table real quickly. And then actually for the first three, I'm not going to make the XY table because you should already know what they are. So if you don't have these memorized, go back to where I first started talking about graphing in section 2.1, and I showed you how to graph these. So basically for an x squared, you got 0, 0, 1, 1, and 2, 4, negative 1, 1, and negative 2, 4, and an x squared is going to be a U shape. And you should be able to make it that quickly. You shouldn't be making an XY table just for this basic shape. Okay. Now, what if you have something like y equals 2x squared plus 7? Okay. For right now, you'll make an XY table, but I'm going to show you what to do with that equation eventually, such that you don't have to make an XY table. So I'm just talking about the most simple square looks like that. Okay. How about an x cubed? You got it at 0, 0, 1, 1, 2, 8. Negative 1, and negative 2, negative 8. And again, you should have that memorized. And just draw it as best you can. Oop, I blew that one. I didn't put the point at I put the point at 3, negative 8, so it should have been at negative 2, negative 8. Okay, and then we'll get down, look like that. Okay, so again, you should have those memorized. You should be able to graph them very quickly. If you're doing it with a pencil, you should be able to even do it a lot faster than I am, because it's kind of hard to do. At least I find it hard to kind of do things on an iPad. Okay, an absolute value equation. And again, what makes it an absolute value? Not that there's an absolute value, but the absolute value is around the variable. So it's just a V. So these 3 points should be sufficient. And then draw a V. As best you can. Okay, now the only one I haven't shown you yet how to do, so we'll make the XY table here, is a square root of equation. Where did that thing come from? Okay. Okay, first of all, you can't plug in any negatives. You can't take the square root of a negative. So the first value you can take the square root of is 0. So the square root of 0 is 0. Okay, the square root of 1 is 1. Now you can plug in 2, 3, etc., but really the next value you can take the square root of is 4, and that's 2. So it's 4 comma 2. And if you want to go up to 9 comma 3, that's fine, but these three should be sufficient. So you have a curve on its side, and the points are 0, 0, 1, 1, and 4, 2. Okay? So you should have those memorized. So I am either going to just hand you a graph on a silver platter and say, here's a graph, do something to it, or I'm going to give you one of these 4 equations and you just have to know how to graph. Remember, you always have to start with something and then you shift, then you stretch, compress, then you reflect. In other words, you have to change something that already exists. Okay, that's about it for today. Again, I just want to make sure you have these memorized, because if you don't have these memorized, all the stuff I'm going to teach you, over the next few videos, it's not going to do you any good, because you won't know how, won't know what to stretch, what to compress, what to shift, et cetera, et cetera. Have a good day, everybody.